Hello, I'm Rob McIntosh, and I'd like to share with you the story behind the legend that shaped the English nation. I mentioned this in my historical book, published some 3 years ago, called Augustine of Canterbury: Leadership, Mission and Legacy. The legend is about young English boys who are brought as slaves for sale in the slave market in Rome, and how Abbot Gregory, soon to become Pope Gregory, sees these young lads and asks who they are, where they are from, and what do people believe back in their homeland. Gregory is so struck by the answers that he vows to launch a mission to pagan England, but the people of Rome won't let him go. So the mission is delayed for 7 years or so, when Augustine, who was prior at Gregory's monastery, is asked to take charge of the mission. And the rest, as they say, is history. But is it? The legend begins here. And this is Whitby, the ruins of the Abbey of Whitby on the east coast of England, in the county of Yorkshire. And here, in the year 713, a life of Gregory was written by one of the monks or one of the nuns. So this late 6th century chance encounter with some English slave boys has often been regarded for over 1400 years as the reason why Pope Gregory launched a mission to pagan England in the first place. The legend within 2 decades found its way to Bede by the year AD 731. Bede was the abbot of his own monastery in Jarrow, up in Northumbria. Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English People, which was published or finished in 731, became the standard text for English historians. And the legend took its root in English soil. So what really happened? Well, there's no record in Rome of this encounter, only in Whitby and in Jarrow. But there is a letter from Pope Gregory to his agent in France, Candidus, a presbyter, a priest, instructing him to pay for the education of 2 young Saxon boys, believed to be in their late teens. And this education would take place in a monastery in France, not in Rome. This legend of the founding of the English nation became very popular in Victorian England. The following pictures from the 19th century show both the range of illustrations to express our island legend and also their different interpretations. There are certain common features which we find in this Victorian, what I would call iconography. There's a background of Rome, its buildings, markets, soldiers, and so on. 3 boys, sometimes more, 3 young boys from England, 2 monks who come to the slave market, the slaver who is selling the boys, a bunch of bystanders, and in some, a female character looking on, with a male figure with his head covered. So let's have a look at the slides. This is a fairly simple and straightforward one, because what it shows us is Gregory with 3 of the young boys laying a hand of blessing upon one of them. Behind him is the second monk, and in the distance behind the 3 boys is a Roman soldier. This is a stained glass window, again showing 2 monks. You can see which one is Gregory by the halo around his head. On the left of the picture we can see the slave master. On the right of the picture we see the 2 young boys, but also a young girl and an older, perhaps a woman, also in chains waiting to be sold. So it's moved away from just being in the gender being boys to being boys and girls. Both genders are present. This one shows the slaver in the center of the picture, pointing down towards the 3 young boys whom he has brought to Rome. And there is Gregory and an additional monk standing looking down and listening to the story. In the background we can see a market going on, there are pillars. In the background there's a temple, and there's someone on the right hand side as well looking on at this particular picture or episode. Another stained glass window, a lot more contemporary. Again showing two monks. We can see by the halo which one is Gregory, pointing to the three young boys, and the slaver with his hands on the head of two of them, commending them to Gregory for their blonde hair and their pale skin, and looking completely different from most Romans of the 6th century. This is another one, another Victorian picture showing Gregory again. Beyond his shoulder there is a group of buildings, which is probably meant to be St. Andrew's Monastery. The other monk is there as well. There's someone else standing in the background looking on. The three young slave boys, extremely well dressed, as one would expect of Victorian children of the period, and a slaver, also very smartly dressed, pointing to them, commending them to Pope Gregory, and another figure standing behind him. Then we come to this interesting one, which has at the center of the picture a woman carrying a baby with a young child carrying a basket at her side. And she is looking back at not 2 or 3, but 5 young slave boys sitting at the foot of two or three very large columns somewhere in the slave market in Rome. On the right-hand side we can see Gregory, another monk, and the slaver himself looking on. Now, the presence of the woman, so central to the picture, indicates this is a mother. She's got 2 children, and she is showing compassion upon those poor children who've come all this way to end up in a Roman slave market. Then there's not a very clear picture, but it's still quite easy to see what's going on. Again, there's Gregory and another monk with him. The slave is probably the person standing behind Gregory. In front of him are 1, 2, 3, at least 4 young slave boys. There's a crowd in the background. You can also see the curve of the Colosseum in the distant background. Then more in the foreground, to the right of the picture, are 2 figures. The one on the left is a man with a cloth over his head, with his hand in his face. His elbow is resting on a pedestal, and he is there in the classic pose of a philosopher at his lectern talking to his students, except this case his hand is over his mouth and he's simply observing. And the woman on the extreme right of the picture, looking up to hear what Gregory is saying and asking of these 4 boys, is probably meant to be the symbol of a pagan goddess of wisdom or motherliness or some such. If we look at the next slide, we see a very similar picture. Again, on the right-hand side now, we see Gregory and another monk looking at these 4 slave boys. And then immediately behind them, to the left of the picture, again the same duo, same position. The philosopher looking on, the woman looking on as well. The woman standing in as a proxy, of course, for one of the female goddesses, mother of wisdom, mother of children perhaps. But what seems to be emerging quite clearly from both this picture and the one we've seen before is that although Gregory is willing to take some responsibility for these boys, neither the philosopher, however much he finds the picture disturbing, or the woman is prepared to take them in their charge. And the moral is, the pagan philosopher looks on, but he takes no action. The pagan female deity, she also looks on. Wisdom, pushing out her protective instincts of motherhood perhaps, and she too does nothing to alleviate the plight of these English slave children. Only Abbot Gregory does the right thing. He sets the children free resolves to send the Christian message to the pagans enslaved to false gods in the English kingdom. That's the moral that seems to emerge from those last two Victorian slides. And that's how they seem to have interpreted the legend. But what if the legend is written at Whitby and then repeated again by Bede in Jarrow? What if that legend was true? Who were these young English boys? How did they come to Rome, and why? What happened to these boys after their encounter in the slave market? Did they ever return to England? And if so, how did they get back to England? These are the questions for historical fiction to answer, because the legend does not. The role of historical fiction, according to Hilary Mantel in her Reith Lectures, she says, we are not looking to contradict the historical record, such as it may be, but to fill in the bits that are missing. And that's why that legend is so important for us. It brings everything down and back to the human scale, not just the great and the glorious, Gregory the Pope, Gregory the Abbot, not just the realm of the gods or the philosophers, but the level of everyday people, caught in circumstances and situations which they did not ask for, nor could they control. What happened to their lives? The little people. What was their story? And the story the legend begins, is that story. The purpose of this historical novel is to find the answers to those questions. So, feel free to come and join in the search for the missing pieces. If you want to find out more, then have a look for the website www.robmcintosh.net. And this is the website, the cover page, the first page, you'll come to the home page. Welcome to lovers of good historical fiction, and we most certainly welcome you. Thank you.